So let's go ahead and take a look at the 14-inch M1 Pro or M1 Max MacBook Pro and see how they've been holding up for the last, almost, 10 months, 9 months, whatever you want to call it. Now, I will definitely tell you, these are probably the best MacBooks you can probably buy. Both the 16-inch and 14-inch are very, very similar to one another, although if you have all the money in the world and you don't care about size, the 16-inch is the better way to go. But what's very interesting is that this M1 14-inch MacBook Pro is actually my new MacBook I've been using. I previously used an M1 MacBook Pro, the 13-inch model, and I had a really, really good time with it. It replaced two different devices I was using, a 2015 MacBook Pro, and I bought that M1 MacBook Pro in 2021. Before that, I was using a 2015 MacBook Pro 15-inch, and I was using a 2015 5K iMac. Now, I love that iMac, and I love that MacBook Pro. And going to that M1 MacBook Pro, I wasn't really too sure what was going on, because it was a smaller, device in general, but also only two USB-C ports. I wasn't a fan of that. I ended up getting a monitor that, was Thunderbolt supported, and that kind of changed my opinion on it. I got adapted to it, and that M1 MacBook Pro 13-inch was amazing. Then now to this 14-inch MacBook Pro, I don't think it was as big of a leap, I would say, from my 2015 one to, the M1 13-inch one, but it's still a ginormous leap, and I don't see myself upgrading this MacBook for at least another 3 or 4 years. So now I could be totally wrong. I wasn't expecting to upgrade my M1 MacBook Pro, as soon as I did, but this MacBook just caught my eye when it came out. I ended up returning it, but then I ended up buying another one because honestly, it's really that much worth it. And after kind of weighing the odds, in my opinion, I think this is a solid MacBook, and I've been so just heavily in love with this since it came out. But now after using it for about almost 2 months now, full time, this is my only MacBook I use. I don't use other Macs or anything like that. I have my 5K iMac on the side, but this is my main go-to machine, and I still love this MacBook for sure. Now, first of all, on the outside of this MacBook, obviously nothing has changed, physically, but I do kind of miss my 13-inch one in terms of the thinness factor and the somewhat portability of it. I mean, this 14-inch one is still very portable. I also have a 16-inch one that's separately that I use pretty much never. So this 14-inch one is the main one I use. And although I like the size and I love what this MacBook has inside of it, I'm not really too big of a fan of the design. And I feel like the flat sides kind of make it feel a little bit more interesting and a little different than my M1 MacBook Pro. So that's the only slight caveat. But like I mentioned, I almost always use this MacBook docked up to a display. So I'm never really even, using this Mac. So it's really not that big of a deal to me personally. On the outside, still we have that Apple logo, which looks great. I think this is still a really good design for this type of MacBook. However, the sides of this MacBook is the big takeaway for me. In my personal opinion, this is the biggest factor of buying this type of MacBook. Now, on the one side of this specific MacBook, we have a MagSafe connector, which honestly is cool, but I don't really use it at all. I don't even have my MagSafe connector plugged in. I almost always use the Thunderbolt ports on this thing, which this one has 3 different Thunderbolt ports inside of it. On the left side, right under that MagSafe charger, we have 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, which are amazing, and we have a headphone jack as well, which is really cool. On the right side though, we have an HDMI port, another Thunderbolt 4 port, and then that SD card slot. Personally, I don't even know why they put an HDMI port in this. I think it's cool and everything, but I'm not really ever going to use it. But that SD card slot is a massive feature with this thing, and that is my most used feature on this Mac. I love having that SD card slot sitting there, and just not having to bring an extra dongle with me or anything makes me feel like I can use this MacBook forever. Personally, that was one of the most annoying things about my previous Macs, was having to go ahead and bring dongles and everything. That's why I didn't want to upgrade in the first place from my 2015 one. With this one, it still hasn't even I still haven't even gotten used to it. I still feel like every time I plug my SD card straight into my Mac, it still feels like a very, very cool thing because I use the SD card every single day. If you're not using it, it's not that big of a deal then. But for me, I use an SD card every day, and I love having that capability built in right from there. On top of that, 2 other things I want to note. From my M1 MacBook Pro, having a Thunderbolt 4 port on each side of the Mac is also really cool. Before, if you were charging and you wanted to, kind of switch around, you kind of only could plug it in on the left side, which was annoying. Now we have the capability of charging it on both sides, which is really cool. And A lot of people forget about this. You can't use multiple displays on an M1 MacBook Pro or an M1 MacBook Air, or I think even the M2 MacBook Air. So you can only use multiple displays on the M1 Pro models or M1 Max models. So you can still use a universal control, and there's some other machines that allow you to use different displays, but natively, if you wanted to connect multiple displays, you would have to have one of these MacBooks, and that is another big reason why I wanted to upgrade, was if I wanted to go ahead and use other monitors, I would have to have a MacBook like this, which I think was really, really important. Now, another thing I want to go ahead and state is with the keyboard, the trackpad, and with the display itself, I think the keyboard is fine. It's not that big of a difference from my M1 Pro MacBook, to be honest. The trackpad is also really good. It still feels the same as before, but the display is the thing that's kind of been very interesting. So I think the ProMotion display is very nice, but I kind of got used to it extremely, extremely fast. I feel like there really wasn't that big of a difference if I'm not comparing them side by side from my, 13-inch MacBook Pro and my 14-inch MacBook Pro display, which is weird and sad because I kind of wanted it to be a bigger difference, but there still really wasn't, which was very, very interesting because I thought it was going to be a bigger difference and it really wasn't. The notch on this MacBook, totally used to it, not that big of a deal for me. Coming from my other MacBooks, I kind of actually like it. It blends in very nicely. The only weird thing that it just kind of weirds me out a little bit is that the cursor does go behind the notch, and there's no indicator telling you that the notch is, the cursor's behind the notch. I wish there was something like that. It kind of seems like Apple kind of just didn't even think about the notch being there, but it is one of the things, but honestly, it's not even that big of a deal for me at all. And I feel like the display is really nice. Do I think it's like the biggest takeaway on this Mac? Honestly, probably, but the SD card slot is the thing that probably did it for me, and it's so crazy to me that SD card slot had that big of an impact on my life, especially with that dual monitor setup too. That's probably a little bit of a bigger thing as well. Now, I will say in the performance segment, I personally use this MacBook for every single thing that I do on an everyday basis for the most part. Everything I'm not doing on my phone, I'm pretty much doing on this Mac. So this includes doing things like video editing. I edited tons and tons of videos. I edited tons of TikToks. I edited tons of different videos I post on Facebook now too. So because of that, I'm just churning through footage all day. For a few hours every day, I'm just pretty much exporting videos out. They're all 1080p at 30 frames, so they're not like 8K videos. And this MacBook does a really good job. I do hear the fans kick on all the time, but that's because I'm exporting multiple videos out at the same time. So it's totally expected. Every single Mac I've had before that had the same issue as well. And it's not an issue. It's just you don't want the, MacBook to thermal throttle. And I don't mind having the fans kick on every once in a while if I expect them to kick on. However, there have been some times where I'm literally just on Chrome or I'm literally on Safari and the fans kick on where my MacBook Pro from before, the 13-inch one, wouldn't have kicked on. So I don't know why this happened. All I have to do in these situations though was just reboot my Mac and it ends up fixing the situation. So I don't know why that ends up happening. It is very, very weird, but it is, something that's happened before my 13-inch MacBook Pro early on, and then it stopped for a long period of time. And then it started happening again after I started, upgrading my MacBook to, I think it was macOS Monterey at the time. But now this MacBook, after rebooting it for the last, little bit of time, it's been perfectly fine. So I haven't had too many issues there. I don't really play any games on my MacBook, but also I'm not really doing anything crazy intense either. I'm not using crazy things. I'm just literally using Final Cut Pro and using Adobe, and that is pretty much it. And this has been giving me a really solid performance factor. I don't really need the most amount of performance, but for everything I've done, going from a 2015 MacBook to an M1 MacBook Pro to this M1 Pro 14-inch MacBook, it's been a steady increase, and I feel like I'm just being able to do my work much faster without having to idle around and sit around or worry about the machine. My battery life also has been pretty predictable. I think it's on par with my 13-inch MacBook Pro. I'm kind of considering turning off the ProMotion display on this thing back to I think 60 Hz if I have the ability of doing so to save a little bit more battery life. But this thing's battery size is pretty decent, and I haven't really had too many complaints about the battery life in my opinion. It was kind of weird at first, but getting used to it now, totally okay. And I want to kind of sum up this whole entire video stating that this is a really good upgrade coming from pretty much any other MacBook from before. If you had that 2015 MacBook Pro, I think this is a very solid upgrade. If you're coming from the M1 MacBook Pros or M1 MacBook Airs, I think this is a beautiful upgrade. The only reason why I wouldn't recommend buying this thing is if you want to save the most amount of money, because these MacBooks are not cheap at all. These things, the base model of the 14-inch one is quite a bit of money, and I wouldn't recommend buying that. I mean, the base model is good, that's what I have, but I had a 1 terabyte model of that. It's $2,000 for that. If you're using a student discount, it's a little bit cheaper. And I think these things, they're available a little bit more now. They're not being sold out all over the place. And this is a very solid MacBook. Would it be the first one I would recommend to people? Absolutely. I've been having nothing but a great experience with it, and I feel really good about the future of these MacBooks. I feel like if Apple ends up coming through with the next model and they end up removing the notch, I don't think I would upgrade. I don't really think that's that big of a deal. If the next MacBook ended up bringing 2 times the ports, I don't think it's that big of a deal for me. If they ended up going through and actually giving us a way higher resolution display, giving us way better battery life and way more ports, I honestly don't think I would upgrade. I feel like I'm very content with this. And that's how I feel really good. With my 13-inch MacBook Pro, I was really happy about it, but I felt like I could go ahead and, I felt ways of which, it could be better. I wish I could connect to multiple displays. I wish I could go ahead and actually use an SD card slot without having to use a dongle. With those types of things, it's really hard to, look at this type of MacBook and feel content with that previous one. And that's exactly what Apple wants. They want you to go and upgrade and spend more money to them. But this product, I think, is amazing. I'm really happy they made this type of MacBook. And honestly, I'm looking forward to probably the next couple of ones. And I'm really looking forward to these things going down in the used market so then more people can buy them for even cheaper. So I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.